Let's get started on building a activity plan step by step. We're going to go through each section and really dive into what should be in these sections and what should not be in these sections. And I'll have some examples of really great parts of the section, really detail oriented, and how we want them to look and why we want them to look. So we're going to start with learning intentions, and remembering with learning intentions that we want to know the age of the child and the developmental milestone level of the child or children. And also we want to take into consideration if we're going to do one domain or multiple domains. And this section can be as detail oriented as you need it to be. So let's jump in. Okay, when we're setting up our whys, remembering things to consider is the age group of the child or children that you're going to be presenting to. Intentional teaching is for infants all the way through adult learning. I had an intention when I sat down to make this video and create this presentation. I was intending to introduce you to the idea of intentional teaching. That was my intention, and then there are many steps that go into that. And then the primary domain, so all children are developing within different domains. They're developing their visual, they are developing auditory, they're developing physical, they're developing language. What domain is going to be the primary focus for this activity plan? Activity plans can also include what activities are going to support every domain. So you can have a list of the domain, and then you're going to have the things that can hit along that. So you'll see that when we go through the examples. And then, are you going to be introducing something new? Are you building on a previous skill? Or is this just an opportunity to practice something to perfect it? If you're talking about balance, and yes, they can balance on one foot, but can they balance for 10 seconds? So that might be the practicing of another skill, but it can be it can be an intentional teaching based on developing a better ability to balance. So those things are what we really want to take into consideration before we sit down and write the intention. Here is an example of a really well-written activity plan that outlines each domain and how this activity is going to support the development of each one of those domains. So you've got gross motor skills, developing basic balance through modified standing poses. This is an activity plan that's written for yoga. Self-regulation, learning the transition between active and calm states, which yoga does. You have movement and rest and movement and rest. And then social skills is how to do this in a group. When you've got multiple people doing a yoga sequence, then you've got people who are moving at a different pace and then taking that and waiting for everyone to get into that posture, pose, or body shape. So this goes through, and then this goes through every single domain, and it goes into language, and it goes on a little bit further. But this is just a snapshot of how you can really think through how the activity is supporting other domains. Here are two more examples. One actually includes the theory behind it. The activity aims to introduce babies to the diverse rhythm and sounds of world music, fostering auditory development through sensory exploration, through gentle movement, tactile engagement. Babies will experience the soothing vibrations of music while strengthening their vestibular systems and body awareness. So this is talking about what's going on in the physical part of the body, and it's just theory. And that can be very helpful because it can give you a greater reason on why this is important. We know from taking child development and physical development that vestibular development is very important because it's what keeps us upright and keeps us from tipping over, and how we can stimulate that development very early on. It starts in infancy, so that's what is included in this learning intention. And the second one is introduce the topic of feelings to children for the first time. This activity plan was actually written for 4 or 5-year-olds. The idea of feelings for a 4 or 5-year-old 4 and 5-year-olds, they have already been introduced to feelings. We are introduced to feelings the minute that we're born. Our bodies, even when we're in utero, our bodies have sensations. We are feeling and experiencing the environment around us and how that lands with us, whether it's words, whether it's energy, whether our physical body has been hurt. We have feelings. This activity would have been to have a greater vocabulary and understanding for around the topic of feelings. So this one is really vague, and it's also not developmentally appropriate to sing and talk about basic feelings. That's actually what you're doing. That's not really the intention. So the intention for this one would be more to practice the vocabulary around the understanding of feelings and give greater support for that understanding of feelings. That would be the intention of that activity. Again, remembering the age of the children that you're working for. And if you're not sure, go back to that developmental milestone checklist. That will tell you whether or not you're on target. And sometimes children are not quite into a particular developmental stage that you would expect them to be. So if this is something that is, remedial, then indicating that that it is actually a remedial skill for the children that you're working for and with. Okay, now that we've gotten all that information of what we need to think about when we are doing intentional teaching practices and how we set that intention, final thoughts are, one of the things that I really like to do when I am thinking about an intentional teaching practice, especially if it is for something that I've observed in a particular child, I like to be able to create that experience for all the children, because going back and having a re-experience and practicing skills is not necessarily not okay. It's actually really good. Children love repetition and they love to repeat activities. Just because we as adults have learned to surf, doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to go back and continue to surf, doesn't mean that we're not going to learn more about surfing and keeping our balance in surfing. Even the most professional people will go back through and practice their skills. As a professional, I go back and I review how to write a intentional teaching practice, how to write an activity plan. It is something that I do practice, and I do review those steps from time to time, especially if it's been a little while since I've written one. Also, things change. You can learn more information if you go back and you visit developmental milestones and different activities. If you can't think of an activity, if you're not really sure, then you can use Google. It's really great. What can I do to help support this developmental skill in a child? So if you've got a child that is struggling with balancing on one leg, there's an activity that you could be doing for all of the children. Going back to the example that I gave in the beginning, you're really focusing and doing this so one child can get more practice at balancing on one leg and having that skill and that ability. And then also, of course, all inside of that were other domains. But all the children can participate in that, and they will probably enjoy it. And they can also, that then gives them the opportunity, without even knowing, that they're going to be supporting by example this other child who is not quite there yet with his balancing factor. So it's really okay. That's the things that we really want to keep in mind as we go forward and into our next steps, which is how we're going to set this activity up.